when it was unveiled today, and you read the screen there where he's hoping this thing will be passed by Christmas. We're going to talk taxes in just a little bit, but let's rewind for a minute back to his point and some of the headlines he was making on this diversity visa program. Remember, this is how this New York terror suspect first came to the U.S. back in 2010 from Uzbekistan and ultimately became a naturalized citizen. So we have Peter Beinart, Sam Vinograd, and Ed Martin, who've been patient enough to stay here with me. And so let's just go back to some of what he said. And Sam, to you. The president said, referring to the diversity visa program, which he wants to end as a result of this, he said the people in that lottery are not that country's finest. Congress must end chain migration. Ultimately, we want a system that's merit-based. So the way that the White House sort of has characterized this is like, you get to come in the country, and you get to come in the country, and you get to come in the country, and that there isn't much vetting. But set the record straight. What's the deal with the system?
This is both inaccurate and a rabbit hole. It's inaccurate because every immigrant that comes to the United States, regardless of their visa category, was it a diversity visa, was it an H-1B visa, they have to meet security and eligibility requirements. It's not as if an immigrant on a diversity visa says, I want to come to the United States, I'm going to walk into the country. There's vetting and there's screening. It is a rabbit hole because in this particular case, all indications right now are that the suspect was radicalized once he got to the United States.
Correct.
So this is not an immigration issue. This is a digital warfare issue. And I am very concerned that by focusing on immigration, the president and his team are paying less attention to countering the spread of extremist content online.
What do you think, Peter?
Yeah, look, the president wants to cut immigration in half. He thinks there are too many immigrants in the United States. Well, you can have that argument, but what he does is he cherry picks whatever incidents he can find. Right? It's costing us jobs. It's burdening services, and now it's terrorism because of the general proposition that he wants fewer immigrants. Now, most economists believe actually that the United States needs at least as many immigrants, partly because we have an aging population and we need people to pay for programs like Social Security and Medicare. If he wants to have the immigration debate, that's fine. But what he keeps on doing is dressing it up as a terrorism debate, when, as we just heard, it's not a terrorism debate. He simply wants fewer immigrants in the U.S.
As a supporter of the president, how do you see it?
Well, I just don't. I mean, it's almost like we're having two different conversations. A guy who was an immigrant here killed 8 people the other day. We have a history now in America of immigrants who get radicalized, wherever they're coming from or however they get radicalized, and they kill Americans. So you're right. The election was about immigration. This president is using every opportunity he can, whether it's the jobs numbers or regulations or, in this case, terrorism, to say, hey, we want our country to be made up of people who want to be part of it based on some criteria. And the vetting, to your point, the vetting must be bad.
But he was radicalized, to Sam's point, in the U.S.
There aren't a lot of Irish kids radicalized that are working at bars in New York City.
Okay, so we know what this is really about then, right? It's about Muslims. And the truth is, the reality is that immigrants are less likely to commit crimes, less likely to commit violent crimes than native-born Americans. In fact, most people who commit terrorist acts in the United States are not even Islamic terrorists, right? They're actually white nationalist terrorists. So maybe we should try to deal with those people, right?
I don't think we've had a white nationalist attack 8 people in the West Side or.
Well, there was a stabbing in Portland earlier this year. For instance. There was a stabbing of an African American.
I'm happy to debate white terror. Let's denounce white supremacists. But let's say this: why are we letting people in from places where they end up doing this to us? Why isn't that a problem?
Hang on. Let me just jump in. Why can't then the president take that same approach to when we had 500 people who were injured in that shooting in Las Vegas and 58 people were killed? All these questions came into the White House. What are you going to do about it? Right. He was essentially saying, well, yes, his wires were crossed. I'm paraphrasing the president speaking about that shooter who murdered all these people, and we're not quite ready to go there on a fix. Why can't he take that approach to that?
I don't know. I guess we can ask him. The question
here is, I'm asking you.
Well, I mean, I think that we have to. Those people. He's a citizen here, right? So if we want to, whatever this shooter in Las Vegas, the violence that he did. If your point is gun control, that's a debate we can have.
My
but we're
point
not
is just to fix so that 58 people aren't murdered.
Well, all right, okay. Well, mental health issues are important, and stop people from acting like that. I'm all for that. But when it comes to the guy that drove over 8 people, he was here from a country where we have now a history, and the president's job is to say we're going to stop that. And I think the Congress, if they want to pass it, you can run the next candidate. Hillary wanted to have more open borders. Run the next candidate for president. This guy ran on this.
Can I just correct the record again on something?
Yeah.
Uzbekistan has actually been, it is a Muslim-majority country, a strong security partner of the United States. We had a base in Uzbekistan where we launched counterterrorism operations into Afghanistan. So let's be clear about what Uzbekistan is or is not. Not all Muslim-majority countries are going to export immigrants to the United States that are more prone to radicalization.
Well, to Peter's point, let's pull that off. It is a problem of Islam. Some of the people in Islam, they're Muslims that do this, and when they're coming, the president ran on saying, he didn't even say, I'm going to vet, he said extreme vetting, meaning the current vetting wasn't sufficient. Whatever it is, from the countries that are majority Muslim or minority Muslim that send people here, we have a list.
Right, but I think Brooke's point is, if you want to do extreme vetting to try to make Americans safer, given that Americans are far, far, far more likely to be killed by gun violence by kids who are Irish and Jewish and Italian and every ethnicity, then why don't we do some extreme vetting when it comes to people's ability to get, very dangerous weapons too? If you want to actually have that attitude towards the security and safety of Americans, why only when it comes to Muslims does Donald Trump have that perspective?
Well, the answer is he ran as someone who thought that the Second Amendment protected people's right to get a gun. He ran on that, so he's living up to his promises. When he ran,
he could still
told
be
the American
wrong.
people, well, that's okay, but you can have that debate, and you can run somebody for president, right? But you're changing the subject from the people who ran, the guy that ran over people the other day.
I'm saying that it's a smokescreen that this is about security. What it's about is an administration.
Immigration.
It's about an administration that has a deep hostility to Muslims and wants fewer Muslims in the United States and wants those Muslims in the United States to have fewer rights. That's what it's about.
It's about a country that has a tradition of welcoming people for reasons of merit and fitting in. And when they don't fit in, they should be sent back.
Let's just take your point. For the U.S. welcoming people for reasons of merit. With regard to this diversity visa program, he was brought in based upon merit. This wasn't some random lottery. He was allowed to come in through some sort of vetting process in 2010 from Uzbekistan. He goes to, he's in Ohio and Tampa and New Jersey, where ultimately, because of social media and reading all this ISIS propaganda and following instructions to a T on how to run people over, the guy goes and gets this Home Depot truck and kills these 8 people because of what he learned on his computer sitting in America.
Right. Well, but my retort would be that system is broken. Whatever the merit is that we thought we need to let this gentleman in, I would say, and Peter will like this, I would say stop all immigration right now. I don't believe that we need immigrants to come to drive Uber cars. I don't think we need that. I think we have lots of people that can drive Uber cars like this guy did. So I would say from countries, in fact, I would say it from most places in the world, slow the merit system down. Huh?
I don't think we should stop all immigration right now and
not
allow immigrants
I think
to
we should
be
stop
employed. Having
people drive over 8 people and kill them. So I'm willing to take a chance on that side of less immigration.
But let's just
a lot less.
Look, there can be a larger immigrant rate, but let's just remember that immigrants are less likely to commit crimes and less likely to commit violent crimes than native-born Americans. So if you want to find an argument for why we should have fewer immigrants, saying that it's going to make America safer is actually not a very good argument.
People that are here that are citizens have protections. You agree that a citizen has protections different than a visitor, right? Isn't that true?
Yes.
So there you go. So we're saying the citizens have protections about their jobs, about their conduct, about how the due process is.
Right.
But if you're coming to live here,
but
we don't have to let you in.
Some immigrants contribute tremendously to the United States. Some immigrants, unfortunately, do what this horrible guy did. Right. My point is, in general, actually, immigrants are less likely to be on the violence-committing side.
I'm not willing to take more people getting killed because you want to take more people that may be good. I think we ought to stop right now.
And create jobs and serve in our military and do all kinds of things.
No, I think you're right. Too many people are dying.
Let's take the conversation back to just where we started before we listened to the president on the death penalty, right? So he's calling for the death penalty in a couple of tweets from last night and this morning against this New York terror suspect. We had the conversation. I heard from you. I didn't hear from you. Correct me, but for the most part, terror suspects going through our court system in this country, it's pretty swift. So that the president referred to the justice system as a joke. What do you think of that?
Brooke, I like to talk about policy, not politics. In this case, this is a national security policy issue. When the President of the United States is undercutting our criminal justice system publicly, it's playing right into extremist hands, and it's making people like Vladimir Putin very happy. Anytime that he's spending tweeting about our criminal justice system, he's not spending working on counterterrorism operations, which gives extremists more room to grow, We've also learned recently that the Russian government launched a massive misinformation campaign in the run-up to the last election that was geared towards polarizing the American voters. Undercutting our criminal justice system in tweets is doing Putin's job for him.
You're shaking your head. Why?
Well, look, you're misunderstanding. The President of the United States is the head of the federal prosecutor's office. You may wish that there was an independent counsel to prosecute cases. He gets to be the one. Just like if you're the U.S. Attorney of the Southern District of New York, you can stand up and say, as to so-and-so, I want this penalty. That's what you get to do. Now, you may wish it wasn't a tweet, but I will tell you this. Across the world, I think that the terrorists look up and say, uh-oh, we have a guy that's saying we're going to get the death penalty if we do this stuff. And I think that's a great deterrence. And back in places where I hear from voters, people are excited about a president who's not going to be politically correct and say, maybe this guy is requesting an ISIS flag, maybe he was radicalized, maybe his mother didn't treat him well, whatever.
I hear you on the political correct point, but, I mean, listen, I think we all would agree that we want this man to rot, right? But in order to have that happen, and he needs to properly go through the U.S. justice system, you know, we just, it may help the defendant's case based upon what the president
Joan
said.
says it. Joan is a very good writer on this. Joan Bishop.
Yeah.
She said it may complicate the jury pick, but I don't think anybody. I haven't heard a lawyer say that it's going to impact. Lots of prosecutors say, I want that guy who, you know, raped 17 people to rot in prison, and you're allowed to do that. Now, when you go into court, you're going to have to be careful, but I'm more excited about when a president who's fearless in saying, if you do this stuff in America, we're coming for you, and not just to have a discussion of due process.
Okay.
I mean, the problem is the president undermining the rule of law. You know, when he says the justice system is a joke, it reminds me of his attack on Judge Curiel last summer, right, where he said this judge, because he was Mexican-American, couldn't try the case, basically. Right. What makes us different than groups like ISIS and Vladimir Putin is the rule of law, is that we have an independent judiciary, right? Now, does it have problems? Sure. If Donald Trump has proposals for how it can be more effective, that's fine. But to attack the criminal justice system when actually it's the envy of the world in the sense that it's what gives us our rule of law, what makes our democracy special and different, it seems to me is a very disturbing thing for a president to do.
Okay. We'll leave it. Peter and Ed and Sam, I appreciate the hearty discussion. Want to hear all perspectives always on this show. Thank you all so much.
Now, breaking news, fair questions. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs says the American people and the families of the fallen are owed an explanation for the ambush in Niger that killed 4 American troops. Why is the Pentagon still unable to answer what he calls fair questions about the deadly clash? That hurt me. The widow of an American soldier killed in Niger is now speaking out about the controversial condolence call she got from President Trump, saying she was hurt by his tone and his words. Why is the president now dodging questions about the widow's scathing remarks? Retirement savings. President Trump is promising the biggest tax cut in history, but he's also promising no changes in the tax to the tax-advantaged retirement plan used by millions of Americans. Does Congress even have a tax cut plan? And so prepared. As tensions grow with Kim Jong-un, President Trump now says the U.S. is prepared for anything. Could the administration's tough talk be leading toward a military conflict with North Korea? I'm Wolf Blitzer. You're in the Situation Room.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Breaking news: under growing pressure from Congress, the Pentagon goes public with an attempt to explain how 4 U.S. troops were killed in a secretive deployment in Niger. Joint Chiefs Chairman General Joseph Dunford says the families of the fallen and the American people are owed more information, but he's offering few details on the deadly ambush, saying the U.S. troops did not expect resistance, were attacked by a larger force, and requested support an hour after coming under fire. Still unanswered why it took 48 hours to recover the body of Sergeant LaDavid Johnson. The briefing comes as the president is caught up in a controversy over his phone call to Johnson's grieving widow. Maisha Johnson says she was very upset, very hurt by the tone of the president's condolence call and his comment that her husband, quote, knew what he signed up for. President Trump today insisted his conversation with the widow was respectful, and he denied that he stumbled trying to recall her husband's name. And amid growing tensions with North Korea right now, President Trump is escalating his war of words with Kim Jong-un, saying the U.S. is prepared for anything, amid deep concern that all the tough talk could lead to a military showdown. There are now new questions tonight about whether the president will visit the Korean demilitarized zone during his upcoming trip to the region. Would that pour fuel on the fire? I'll speak with Senator Ben Cardin. He's the ranking member of the Foreign Relations Committee. And our correspondents, specialists, and guests, they're standing by with full coverage. President Trump is now keeping quiet about the Niger ambush and sharp criticism from the widow of one fallen soldier. Let's begin with our senior White House correspondent, Jim Acosta. Jim, update us on the very latest.
Wolf, the White House appears to be putting the brakes on any more comments coming from the White House on the deaths of 4 soldiers in Niger. Today, President Trump was asked repeatedly about his handling of the soldiers' deaths, as well as his treatment of a Gold Star mother. But unlike last week, there was near total silence from the president.
Can you tell the public what happened in Niger?
It was an uncharacteristically silent President Trump, avoiding questions all day long on the widow of LaDavid Johnson, the Army sergeant killed along with 3 other service members in Niger earlier this month.
Do you regret that Meyers Johnson was thank you, Fred.
But the questions are not going away, in part because the sergeant's widow, Meyers, had a respectful conversation with the widow of Sergeant LaDavid Johnson and spoke his name from the beginning without hesitation. The widow also backed her Congresswoman Frederica to capitalize politically on the exchange, tweeting, "Wacky Congresswoman Wilson is the gift that keeps on giving for the Republican Party. A disaster for Dems. You watch her in action and vote Republican." And Wilson firing back. Niger is President Trump's Benghazi. He needs to own it. Wilson is also hitting back at White House Chief of Staff John Kelly, who erroneously stated the Congresswoman took credit during a 2015 speech for funding an FBI facility in Florida, something she didn't do, tweeting, "General Kelly owes the nation an apology because when he lied about me, he lied to the American public." Now, the president's near total silence on the controversy stands in stark contrast with the scene in the Rose Garden 1 week ago, when he suggested he was more compassionate than past commanders-in-chief when it came to fallen soldiers.
You look at President Obama and other presidents, most of them didn't make calls, a lot of them didn't make calls.
Add to that, roll calls reporting the White House scrambled to obtain contact information for families of fallen service members after the president told Fox Radio he almost always makes those calls.
I have called, I believe everybody, but certainly I'll use the word virtually everybody.
It's another textbook example of the president throwing the White House off message. This week's agenda item overshadowed tax reform.
People want to see it, and I call it tax cuts. It is tax reform also, but I call it tax cuts.
Now, a White House official confirmed the West Wing did attempt to expedite condolence letters to families of fallen soldiers after the president's remarks in the Rose Garden last week. The official said during this process, a discovery was made that there were, quote, bureaucratic reasons for why some of the letters had not gone out to the families. In most of those cases, the official said, letters and contacts were delayed because the service member killed in action had been involved in what they call multiple casualties incidents. This official said the White House then directed that the condolence letters be sent out. Wolf.
All right, Jim, thank you. Jim Acosta over at the White House. Lawmakers certainly have plenty of questions on the Niger ambush and the overall U.S. deployment there. Let's go to our senior congressional correspondent, Manu Raju. Manu, members of Congress, I assume they're going to get their own briefings.
Yeah, they certainly are, Wolf, and also calling for more information from the Trump administration, something we just started to see today when the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, for the first time, laying out in detail the timeline of events that happened, explaining that these U.S. forces were on a reconnaissance mission and trying to combat this attack from these forces in Niger. But what the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff also made clear, Wolf, a lot of questions remain unanswered. Tonight, the Pentagon revealing new details about the ambush in Niger that killed 4 U.S. soldiers.
And there's a perception that the Department of Defense has not been forthcoming.
The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff revealing that U.S. forces were on a reconnaissance mission and on their way back to their operating base in Niger when the firefight began. But they waited 1 hour to call for support.
Important to note that when they didn't ask for support for that first hour, my judgment would be that unit thought they could handle the situation without additional support. And so, well, we'll find out in the investigation exactly why it took an hour for them to call.
It took French fighter jets another hour to arrive on the scene, which was 2 hours after the ambush began. Dunford making clear many questions still remain.
Did the mission of U.S. forces change during the operation? Did our forces have adequate intelligence, equipment, and training? Was our pre-mission assessment of the threat in the area accurate? How did U.S. forces become separated during the engagement, specifically Sergeant Johnson? And why did it take time to find and recover Sergeant Johnson?
The comments come amid growing tension with Capitol Hill, where top lawmakers from both parties accuse the administration of failing to disalign militants near the Niger-Mali border. There's been conflicting information about what the American troops were doing at the time of the ambush operations in the capital, Niamey. The military says a fraction of these troops are special operations forces, advising and assisting the Nigerian military. The Pentagon says it's kept Congress regularly informed, pointing to a letter Trump sent Hill leaders in June, saying they were there. Now on Thursday, the Senate Armed Services Committee will get its own briefing, a closed briefing, when members of the Pentagon will come and explain what they know what happened. One question that Dumbfounded said that he could not answer today is exactly how Sergeant David Johnson's body apparently was a mile away from the central scene of that ambush, saying that he did not want to get into that because it's still under investigation. But Dumbfounded also saying that if Congress doesn't know what's happening here, then, quote, I need to double my efforts to get the information out. Wolf.
Good point. All right, Manu, thank you very much. Joining us now, Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland. He's the senior Democrat on the Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, thanks very much for joining us. Lots of very disturbing questions on this Niger ambush. But let me start with the President of the United States. Why do you believe he simply couldn't let the widow of Sergeant David Johnson have the last word on this today? She's grieving. She's only 24 years old. She has 2 little kids, a third one on the way. Why did he need to get the last word and tweet about it this morning?
Well, first, it's good to be with you. Secondly, it's hard to understand how the president handles these things. We saw the way he handled the Khan family during the Democratic convention. He seems to always want to get the last word, even when he's wrong. And it's very frustrating. And obviously, it's a very difficult time for the family. And it's time that the president understands that.
When do you believe that Meyers Johnson, the Gold Star widow, and the American people will learn why it took nearly 48 hours to find Sergeant David Johnson's body?
Well, there's a lot of unanswered questions, and I think it's appropriate that we'll have briefings in Congress as to what went wrong. First of all, understanding why our troops are there. This is under a 2001 authorization, which many of us think does not apply to having soldiers in northern Africa. So I think there's a question as to whether Congress has authorized the use of force in northern Africa, and secondly, why we're not being kept readily informed. Now, what happened in regards to this episode, why it took so long to get help, why the body was left, these are all questions that need to be answered. Did you know,
Senator, that there were almost 1,000 U.S. troops deployed in Niger?
No, I did not. I'm not part of the group that would have been formally notified about U.S. Troop presence, but I must tell you, I do believe, as the ranking Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, the President of the United States should have come to Congress to seek authorization for American troops that are put in a combat-type situation.
Let me switch gears while I have you for a moment. You're the top Democrat on the Foreign Relations Committee. The former President Jimmy Carter has now publicly offered to travel to North Korea to negotiate directly with Kim Jong-un. Should the White House take him up on that offer?
Well, we need a surge in diplomacy, and we've talked about this before. I think we need to open up lines of communication. There is a path forward where we can achieve our objective of a non-nuclear Korea Peninsula, and that the Kim Jong-un regime can get the type of assurances that they want, that the United States will respect the current 38th parallel in Korea. There are ways that we can talk back and forth without the use of a military threat, and I would hope the president would take advantage of every opportunity to do that.
Well, should he take advantage of Jimmy Carter's offer?
Well, I think that's one opportunity. I know that Secretary Tillerson has looked for other avenues of communication with North Korea. I think using a former president who has, I think, global reputation for pursuing peace would be a helpful step.
And he's been an earlier visitor to North Korea, brought home Americans who were there as well. Another sensitive issue, U.S.-Russian relations, Senator. President Trump we're told, may sit down with the Russian President Vladimir Putin on what's called the sidelines of the Asian-Pacific Economic Conference, the Economic Summit that takes place next month in Vietnam. Do you believe that would be appropriate, the right thing to do?
Well, I hope he has a controlled agenda if he talks to Mr. Putin. There are many issues that still need to be answered, including Russia's meddling in the U.S. elections and European elections, what their future intents might be, what they're doing in Syria, what they're doing in Ukraine. There are a lot of questions that we have about Russia activity, and I hope that the president uses that opportunity to make it clear to Mr. Putin, if in fact they meet, that we need to have progress made on these fronts.
We got to take a quick break, Senator, but I have more questions for you. Let's resume this conversation right after this.
The Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer is brought to you by CA Technologies. Download this.
President Trump is vowing the biggest tax cuts in U.S. history while warning GOP lawmakers they'll pay a huge price in 2018 if they don't make it happen. We're talking with Democratic Senator Ben Cardin. Senator, stand by. I want to go to our congressional correspondent, Sunderland Sirfati, first. Sunderland, there's a lot of urgency from Hill Republicans to pass these tax cuts, but it's still not entirely clear what the plan even is.
That's absolutely right, Wolf, and there still is so much influx up here on Capitol Hill as they move to actually putting pen to paper and writing this tax bill. There's still within the Republican Party not a consensus on what cuts to make, where to make them. Republican leaders are throwing out a lot of different ideas about how to raise revenue, trying to see essentially what sticks and what ideas are latched onto within their caucus. Now, one idea that has been floated in recent days from Republicans is putting a cap on contributions to 401ks. That's something that President Trump essentially shot down over Twitter this morning. Trump tweeting, quote, "There will be no change to your 401k. This has always been a great and popular middle-class tax break that works, and it stays." So certainly there's a lot of urgency right now on crafting the policy, but certainly urgency coming from the White House on the politics of all of this. President Trump heads up here to the Hill tomorrow to meet with Senate Republicans. Expect a very similar message than the one that he delivered over the weekend when he hopped on a conference call with House Republicans, and that's we've got to get this tax bill passed by the end of the year or else we will face a bloodbath in the midterms. Well,
What's the timeline for all of this?
Well, first and foremost, the House, they've got to pass the Senate budget. That has to happen potentially by Thursday of this week is when they'll move to do that. Then they've got to actually write the bill, then produce the bill potentially as early as next week. And the White House is being very bullish on the timeline. President Trump wants this passed by the end of this year, and he even said he wants a bill on his desk by Thanksgiving. Now, that is very, very optimistic, no matter how you slice it. But leaders up here certainly raising some expectations to try to keep that momentum going.
All right, Sunderland, thank you. Sunderland Sirfati up on Capitol Hill. We're back with Democratic Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland. He's also a member of the Senate Finance Committee. Senator, lots of pressure on the Republicans to deliver, to get this tax cut passed. What do you think their chances are?
Well, I don't think it's very good. When you look at the blueprint first, it blows a hole in the deficit. And I know a lot of us are very concerned about adding at least $1.5 trillion to the deficit. We also are concerned that the overwhelming amount of tax relief goes to high-income families as compared to middle-income families. They also raised the issue of cutting Medicare and Medicaid by $1.5 trillion. These, to me, are issues that will be very difficult for them to get the necessary votes to move a tax bill that is in that direction. And quite frankly, they're using a process that is doomed to, I think, fail if they do not really make a bipartisan effort to have a broader coalition so that a tax bill can enjoy broader support and is one that, even if it were to become law, will be able to remain in law more than just one term of Congress.
Let me just point out that the president has told his budget director, Mick Mulvaney, exactly what he's told the American public. There will be absolutely no cuts to what are called entitlement programs, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Mulvaney is fighting him on that, but the president so far is holding firm. Why do you say the president will support cuts in Medicare and Medicaid?
Well, if you look at the budget resolution that passed the United States Senate, and also the resolution that passed the House of Representatives, it very much provides for cuts in Medicare and Medicaid. So that the implementing legislation that provides for the consideration of the tax bill envisions that there would be cuts in these programs. I hear what the president has said, but I must tell you, we find over and over again what he said in order to protect some of the critical programs such as Medicare and Medicaid. We then look at his actions. Look what he did on the Affordable Care Act. He supported programs that cut Medicaid dramatically. So the president's actions are inconsistent with his words.
Your colleague, Republican Senator Orrin Hatch, told the Washington Post, and I'll read it to you, quote, "I think the Democrats are crazy to not try and deal with him directly. 7 years ago, he was a Democrat. Doesn't take any brains to realize that he'd be open." Is tax reform something Democrats should be working directly with the president on?
We absolutely want to work with Republicans. We want to work with this administration. We recognize that our tax code needs changes. Our requirements are pretty simple. Let's make sure that we don't finance it by borrowing more money and going greater into debt. Let's make sure that the focus is on middle-income families. They're the ones who need the tax relief. And let's use a truly bipartisan process. If you do that, yes, absolutely, Democrats want to be part of the process because we believe there's a need for a change in our tax code.
Senator Ben Cardin, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Coming up, as tensions grow with Kim Jong-un, is the Trump administration's tough talk on North Korea making a military conflict all the more likely? Stay with us. You're in the Situation Room. Our breaking news, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff this afternoon clarified the timeline of this month's ambush of U.S. troops in Niger, admitting many fair questions remain unanswered and are now under serious investigation. President Trump today ignored multiple questions about the ambush at his phone call to the widow of one of the 4 fallen soldiers. Let's bring in our specialists. And David Axelrod, earlier this morning, Meyers Johnson, the Gold Star widow, was on TV on ABC speaking very emotionally, very powerfully about her husband, contradicting the president. He immediately went to Twitter and tweeted this: "I had a very respectful conversation with the widow of Sergeant LaDavid Johnson and spoke his name from beginning without hesitation." What advice would you give the president right now in dealing with this? This is such a sensitive issue, especially for those Gold Star families.
Oh, 100%. Look, Wolf, I can see how now we know sort of the contours of the conversation between the president and Mrs. Johnson in the first instance, and you can understand how he might have said the words that have been reported, and she might have interpreted them completely differently than he meant them. Let's just stipulate that. But now we know how she interpreted them. This 24-year-old widow whose husband, a Green Beret, had just died in the service of his country under circumstances she still doesn't know, and we still don't know. And you would think that the president would cut her some slack. You would think that the president would say, you know, if my words in some way were received in ways I didn't mean them, I'm so sorry. I and the whole country grieve for you and with you. Wouldn't that be the right thing to do? But that's not Donald Trump. For Donald Trump, it's always about him, and he's never wrong, and he can't admit mistakes, even in this case when it is so clearly the right thing to do. And I think it hurts. It hurts him. It obviously hurt her, but it hurts him as well. It diminishes him. It diminishes the office of the presidency. I think most people in the country would have wished that he handled it much differently.
You know, Chris, he had several opportunities today. There were cameras at 2 earlier photo ops, and then in the Rose Garden, he easily could have opened up those statements. He had the visiting Prime Minister of Singapore with him, but before they get to that, he could have opened up with a statement. He didn't have to wait for reporters to shout questions at the end, which he ignored, as he did in the earlier photo ops, but he could have easily opened up. I'd like to begin, we'll get to this, with a statement expressing his deep regret, his sorrow, the fact that this widow, this Gold Star widow, apparently misunderstood what he was trying to convey.
Yeah, it's not that he couldn't do it, it's that he doesn't want to do it. We heard out of the White House today, you know, don't expect, there's not going to be another call to Meyers Johnson. David Axelrod's point, I think, is the most important one, which is Calling a widow of American soldier killed in action is extremely difficult. It's emotionally difficult. You know that there's not a good way to do it. No one can really practice for it, but Donald Trump is someone who never was in politics before. He never had done anything like this. The politics of getting along, finding a good place to be with the widow of an American killed in action is way easier. If there was a misunderstanding, just call her. Now, there's too much water under the bridge now, candidly. But just call her and say, you know what? This is hard for me. I know it's not nearly as hard for me as it is for you. If I express myself inarticulately, I apologize if what I said isn't what you heard. Because guess what? The President of the United States is supposed to take the high road. It's not about who's right. This woman lost her husband. Just say, you know what? I get it. If there was a misunderstanding, I'm sorry for it, and we honor his sacrifice. The end.
Look, it's one thing for the president to get in a tit-for-tat with a Democratic congresswoman who is a politician and signed up to be in this arena, a down and dirty political arena. It's a whole nother thing what we saw today with a commander-in-chief criticizing the widow of somebody who died in service to the country that the commander-in-chief is the head of, is the leader of, is just mind-boggling. And it doesn't surprise me that the president didn't say anything. I actually think that was not a bad thing, for him to just kind of try to stop talking about it. And they sent the chairman of the Joint Chiefs out, who had a very measured, very calm, very lengthy back and forth with reporters, and answered as much as he said that he could, knowing that there are a lot of unknowns about the mission. And that is what matters. The mission. What happened? Why did this man die in the first place, and 3 others as well?
The problem, though, is Dan is exactly right. I thought General Dunford is what you want to be the face of this if you're the Trump administration. The problem, as always, is Donald Trump, and more specifically Donald Trump's Twitter feed. So yeah, he didn't take questions that were shouted at him today. Not a bad idea. If he hadn't sent a tweet out this morning effectively saying this person is not telling the truth, if he doesn't take to Twitter tomorrow or the next day and say more about this is now day 8 of this back and forth. I would argue, to Dana's point, he made it worse today with the engaging with the widow and essentially saying, well, her version of events isn't how it happened. There's nothing, if past his prologue, there is no reason to think Donald Trump will suddenly become sort of quiet on this or anything else, and that's always his biggest problem. If you left it with General Dunford, that would be one thing, but he doesn't ever leave well enough alone.
And it's one thing to get into this, to react via Twitter to this widow, this wonderful woman who just lost a husband, has 2 kids, another one on the way, and another thing, as he did yesterday, to go after the Democratic Congresswoman in a tweet. Wacky Congresswoman Wilson is the gift that keeps on giving for the Republican Party. Disaster for Dems. You watch her in action and vote. He goes after her. That's one thing, as Dana correctly points out, but it's another thing to dispute what this widow said. All right, stand by. Much more coming up right after this. We're back with our political specialist, and David Axelrod. I want you to listen to a comment that Senator John McCain made. It's getting a lot of attention. One after a doctor diagnosed that he had bone spurs in his foot. What was your reaction to that?
My reaction was, I don't think the reference was coincidental. Look, I think there's no mystery that these guys don't get along. Dating back to when Donald Trump denigrated Senator McCain's military service, saying he prefers people who didn't get captured. We all know Senator McCain spent 5 terrible years in the captivity of the North Vietnamese. And now Senator McCain has been critical of the president as commander-in-chief. He made a speech in Philly earlier this week when he was accepting the Liberty Medal, really challenging the president's worldview. But the president responded by saying, well, if he doesn't stop criticizing me, I'm going to fight back. And what he learned, I think, in this interview or through this interview is don't get into a taunting war with a guy who spent 5 years in the Hanoi Hilton and who is facing a mortal illness because he's not scared of you.
No.
He's not worried about you, okay? And I think this was Senator McCain's way of saying, you know what, I'm done with you.
Yeah. And look, David mentioned that John McCain was a prisoner of war for 5.5 years in Vietnam during the Vietnam War. When he came back, part of what he did before he actually ended up leaving the Navy was he went to the Naval War College to study exactly why and how America got into the Vietnam War and how they went so wrong. So what he was talking about there, I think, was for a larger project on Vietnam, but it was after a lot of scholarly intake that he has done, which I think the reason I'm bringing this up is because it's just another kind of data point on how different an experience John McCain has had and why his worldview is the way it is. And there is no question that he chose that example as a dig to Donald Trump.
Forget the president during the campaign that John McCain was not a hero because he was a POW and he was a prisoner. That's not
right,
the road.
It took him almost 2 years to get back at him, but he found a way.
I remember July 2015 when it happened. I basically thought, well, that's it. You know, Donald Trump, you know, it was right after he had announced his campaign. He was at a forum in Ames, Iowa, and said that. And he thought, well, I mean, you know, POWs tend not to be people that you should attack, right? Whether it's John McCain or anyone else. It was a first indicator that Donald Trump's appeal did not play by traditional rules. But yes, McCain, the long arc of history got to that healthcare vote, and now this.
All right, guys, there's a lot more coming up, including the growing tensions between the United States and North Korea. President Trump said he's prepared right now for anything. Is a military conflict looming? And says tensions grow between the United States and North Korea. President Trump says the U.S. is, quote, prepared for anything. Is a military conflict becoming more likely? CNN's Brian Todd is joining us with the latest. Brian, what are you learning?
Well, tonight there is real concern among well-connected people here in Washington that an armed conflict with North Korea is becoming more likely. The talk from the Trump administration in recent weeks has only grown tougher, and neither they nor Kim Jong-un's regime seem able to back down from it. As tensions build with North Korea's volatile leader, new concerns tonight about whether the Trump administration is talking itself into a possible conflict with Kim Jong-un. President Trump kept up the tough talk in an interview with the Fox Business Network.
We're prepared for anything. We are so prepared like you wouldn't believe. You would be shocked to see how totally prepared we are if we need to be. Would it be nice not to do that? The answer is yes. Will that happen? Who knows?
The president's comments follow other remarks from his national security team in recent weeks, indicating a tougher tone on North Korea. CIA Director Mike Pompeo warning about Pyongyang's rapidly advancing threat of a nuclear-tipped missile that could hit the U.S.
It's now a matter of thinking about how do you stop the final step.
And the latest warning from Secretary of State Rex Tillerson that diplomatic efforts to solve this crisis might fail.
Those diplomatic efforts will continue until the first bomb drops.
The tough talk extends back at least to August, when Trump spoke like no president ever has when addressing North Korea's threats.
They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen.
I do think it's pretty stunning that the U.S. president speaks about openly going to war with North Korea because, as you know, conflict is just unimaginable in the Korean Peninsula.
But some say Trump's been placed in a position no other American president ever has by the aggression of his young adversary.
Some of this is also on Kim Jong-un, right? Absolutely. We have seen multiple nuclear tests of a hydrogen bomb, not just a fission bomb, but a fusion bomb of multiple hundreds of times the size of Hiroshima. ICBM tests over Japan. Nobody has done this before, certainly from North Korea.
Tonight, another key strategic question. Will President Trump visit the heavily fortified DMZ, as other American presidents have, when he travels to Asia next month?
It could also really stoke the fires, and Kim Jong-un is very unpredictable. If he doesn't go, on the other hand, it looks either like we're making a concession to North Korea, or it is making it look like President Trump is somehow not your typical president.
A senior White House official tells CNN that a Trump visit to the DMZ has not been ruled out. but that the timing for it may not be quite right because the president is scheduled to visit a U.S. military installation at about the same time. White House officials say they're not concerned about any message the president might be sending if he